Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Martial Universe Season 6 based on novel. So let's start. Within the hall, numerous amazed gazes were currently glued to the ancient stone block. More accurately, the gazes had locked onto the three imprints on the stone block. What a forceful fist aura. Intense shock surfaced on Song Duan's and Peng Fei's faces. They had similarly sensed the terrifying fist aura that had emerged from the stone block when Musho was sent flying. Lin Dong's gaze flickered. He had already understood that the 8th-level sex inheritance should be located on this stone block. However, that fierce and powerful fist aura was quite frightening. At this moment, the Musho who had been sent flying once again dashed over. His face was a little ashen as he stared intently at the stone block, appearing as if he was on the brink of lashing out to blast it to pieces. However, he quickly calmed himself. This stone block was no ordinary object. If he continued to act thoughtlessly, he would likely embarrass himself even further. Moreover, he now clearly understood the situation. This stone block was likely the most precious object within the ruins of the 8th-level sect. This realization made him feel a surge of joy. No matter what happened, it seems that he would no longer have to return empty-handed. Numerous gazes within the large hall were saturated with both surprise and joy as they looked at the stone block. However, there was no longer anyone who would act carelessly. Firstly, they had learnt from Musho's mistake. Second, with so many people watching, obtaining the inheritance of this place might not be a good thing. Under the allure of the true sect inheritance, the boldness in the hearts of those people here would likely be magnified by countless times. Even someone like Song Duan and the others would not be able to deter the rest with force. Everyone. The silence in the hall persisted for a short period before Song Duan finally opened his mouth and spoke. His gaze swept across the area, pausing on Lin Dong for a moment as he said, "We have come to here for the 8th-level sex inheritance. From what I can see, the inheritance should be inside this ancient stone block. We are not unreasonable people. Since all of us have come here, each of us will naturally have a chance at this inheritance. Thus, let each of us shall rely on our own ability. As for who will eventually obtain the inheritance, shall we let it depend on one's luck and ability." Song Duan's words were indeed pleasing to the ears. However, some of the sharper individuals managed to infer some clues from his words. Given how Musho was sent flying earlier, this stone block clearly possessed an extremely ferocious fist aura. That fist aura was something that even someone who had stepped into the 2 Yuan Nirvana stage would have difficulty dealing with, much less the rest of them. Song Duan's words might seem fair on the surface, but it was obvious that he and the other strong individuals would have an advantage. Even though this was the case, the rest could do nothing about it. This was a world where strength was king. They were not naive enough to think that Song Duan would give them absolute fairness. It was already more than fortunate that they were given the chance to try their luck at the inheritance. Musho and Peng Fei were clearly extremely agreeable to this suggestion, and immediately nodded in agreement. Lin Dong merely glanced at them, his face like the surface of a still old well. However, he did not raise any objections. Song Duan smiled a little when he observed that no one raised any objections. Unexpectedly, he took a step back and said, "Whoever is interested, please go ahead." From the looks of it, it was apparent that he did not intend to be the first one to try. It was likely that he was worried that he would reenact Musho's miserable scene. However, if Song Duan was worried, the others would naturally be even more worried. Hence, the main hall lapsed into a strange silence for a time. Everyone looked at each other, but no one dared to step forward. Yet, it was obvious that this situation would not continue on forever. A greedy expression involuntarily flickered in the eyes of some people, as they looked at the ancient-looking stone block. After some time, a 1 yuan nirvana stage expert could no longer endure and finally stepped forward. Under the crowd's watch, he arrived in front of the stone block. Having seen Musho's earlier attempt, this 1 yuan nirvana stage expert was obviously extremely careful. All the yuan power inside his body surged out and completely wrapped around his body. After which, he very cautiously extended his hand towards the stone block. The main hall was completely silent. Everyone's gaze was glued onto the 1 yuan nirvana stage expert's extended hand. Under their attention, he grew rather nervous, perspiration appearing on his forehead. Under the crowd's gaze, his hand finally made contact with the stone block. However, he did not touch the fist imprint this time around. Instead, he reached towards the pitch-black finger hole. No shocking change occurred when he made contact, but quickly after, Lin Dong's pupils suddenly shrunk. He suddenly kicked the 1 yuan nirvana stage expert and sent him flying. You? The fellow who had been kicked aside by Lin Dong was startled. Just as the former was about to let out a furious cry, he saw a flash shoot out from the hole. With a swoosh sound, it left behind a bottomless thumb-sized black hole at the spot he was standing at earlier. Remnants of a frighteningly sharp aura lingered around the tiny black hole. Evidently, if that fellow had been struck, he would definitely lose his life. Gulp. The 1 yuan nirvana stage expert immediately swallowed. His eyes turned towards Lin Dong in thanks, but the latter ignored him. Those eyes of Lin Dong were solemnly staring at the stone block. This object was indeed not simple at all. By the side, the Songduan trio also looked at the tiny dark hole on the ground with grim expressions. It was clear that they also felt this was going to be extremely troublesome. With the scene of that fellow narrowly escaping death, everyone who had wanted to give it a try earlier finally squashed their desire. If it were not for Lin Dong reacting fast enough and lending a hand out of goodwill, that the fellow would have died on the spot. Could not be certain if Lin Dong would show kindness and help the next time. Hence, the main hall once again lapsed into silence. Even the Songduan trio did not dare to act carelessly. Lin Dong frowned a little as he stared at the stone block. A moment later, he slowly took a step forward. As an existence that was the focus of everyone's attention, this action of Lin Dong's immediately caused everyone's eyes to gather on him. Even the Songduan trio became fully concentrated. Lin Dong's footsteps came to a halt in front of the stone block. With a thought, a surge of yuan power swiftly started flowing in his channels. I want to see just how terrifying the fist aura within this stone block is. Lin Dong's eyes flickered as he softly mumbled. In the end, he finally extended his hand and touched the fist imprint. Slap! Under the numerous unblinking gazes, Lin Dong's hand made contact with the fist imprint. In an instant, his expression suddenly turned serious. He could sense a powerful and fierce fist aura suddenly sweep out from within the stone block like a crouching dragon. The fist aura was as majestic as lightning, containing an ancient and forceful feeling. It was as though it was the most powerful punch unleashed by nature, and was extremely wild. Boom! The fist aura wildly surged up Lin Dong's arm, causing his sleeve to burst apart. Lin Dong's eyes were solemn. Yuan power whistled out from within his body and crashed into the wave of fist aura, attempting to force it out of his body. However, the instant the two forces touched, the yuan power within Lin Dong's body instantly crumbled. It was as if the fist aura was an existence above his yuan power, causing him to have no means of blocking it. Lin Dong's expression changed when he saw signs of his yuan power crumbling. He hurriedly maneuvered his mental energy, however, even with the help of his mental energy, he was still unable to withstand the battering attack of the majestic fist aura. Lin Dong, use the fusion power of the ancient universe formation. This fist aura is too formidable and berserk. An ordinary force will not be able to withstand it. Little Martin's cry suddenly rang out, while the fist aura easily broke through Lin Dong's many layers of defense. Lin Dong concentrated, without wasting any time. Yuan power, mental energy, and the devouring power swiftly entered the ancient universe formation above his dantian. A grayish-black fusion force burst out and collided with the fist aura. Boom! The two forces ruthlessly smashed into each other, as Lin Dong's body trembled violently. However, the fusion force did not crumble as expected. The grayish-black fusion force adhered to the fist aura like maggots in one's bones, cutting its momentum in the process. Moreover, the devouring power within also erupted, swallowing the incomparably majestic fist aura little by little. Everyone in the main hall was looking at the now deathly pale Lin Dong in alarm, while a gloating expression surged in the eyes of the Song Duan trio. However, before the smile on their faces could spread, they suddenly sensed the wild and violent fist aura being emitted by Lin Dong's body swiftly weaken. The trio's expressions immediately changed when they saw this scene. From the looks of it, Lin Dong had actually endured the majestic fist aura that even they were terrified of. Did this not mean that he would be able to obtain the sect inheritance? Eyes flickering, the Song Duan trio suddenly stepped forward a split second later. Their hands also reached out towards the stone block. The moment that majestic thunder-like fist aura was swallowed by Lin Dong, his mind suddenly entered into a trance-like state. Faintly, an ancient picture seemed to flash past his mind. That picture was still that of an ancient large hall, and one was still barely able to recognize it as the main hall where Lin Dong's group was at. There was also a stone block quietly standing at the center of the large hall. Meanwhile, there was a thin and elderly figure in front of the stone block. He was less than half as tall as the stone block, but the faint ripple emitted from within his body was so strong that it could shatter this world. It was as though a slight movement of his body could cause the land to shake. Only the back of the old figure could be seen in the picture. After which, Lin Dong saw the old man raising his hand and casually swung his palm. Bang! This palm might appear dull and ordinary, but when the wind from the palm was brandished, space itself became distorted. A formless powerful fist aura was just like a creeping prehistoric enormous beast that suddenly pounced over with killing intent, causing one's mind to quiver. Boom! The palm landed on the stone block. However, the frightening fist aura that could cause this domain to explode did not do any damage to the stone block. All it left behind was a palm imprint that was only half a finger deep on its surface. This was naturally not because the material of the stone block was too hard. Instead, it was because this mysterious old man had already reached a level where he could retract and unleash his strength as he pleased. Boom! The old man once again unleashed a punch and pressed a finger forward after the palm landed. He once again left behind a fist aura and a finger mark. Lin Dong seemed to have vaguely saw traces of a martial art as he did so. It was likely that this palm, fist and finger should be quite a powerful martial arts. However, Lin Dong also vaguely sensed that it was not so simple. The 8th-level true ideal is on the stone block. Someone with affinity will be able to obtain it. While Lin Dong was deep in thought, that old figure also gradually faded. An indifferent voice that appeared to have been transmitted from the ancient times sounded within Lin Dong's heart. One could see the picture strangely become real after the voice sounded, while Lin Dong's body directly appeared in front of the stone block within that picture. Swoosh! Following Lin Dong's appearance, the palm imprint, fist imprint and finger imprint on the stone block actually transformed into 3 rays of light that surged out. After which, it transformed into 3 light clusters that were suspended above the stone block. Is this the inheritance of the 8th-level sect? Lin Dong's heart was filled with joy when he saw this scene. His eyes swept over it before he extended his hand towards the cluster of light that contained the palm imprint. Kai. Lin Dong's expression suddenly changed the instant when he was about to extend his hand. His gaze swept over the place and saw that 3 figures had appeared behind him. They were clearly Song Duan's group. The 3 figures had just appeared when their eyes greedily looked at the 3 clusters of light above the stone block. Even though no one said anything, all of them knew what was going on. Hence, they were merely hesitated for a moment before they rushed out. The speed of Song Duan and Peng Fei were the fastest. However, they were clearly still a little afraid of Lin Dong. Therefore, they did not dare to snatch the palm imprint light cluster that Lin Dong was about to grab. Instead, they rushed towards the fist imprint and the finger imprint. With their extremely fast speed, their hands grabbed the light clusters in a flash. Immediately, their faces revealed a wild joy. It was likely that they had sensed just how great of a treasure the thing within the light cluster was. Lin Dong became extremely furious when he saw that these 3 fellows had actually appeared and spoiled the situation. He had swallowed quite a great amount of the majestic fist aura on the stone block, only to allow these 3 fellows to take advantage of the situation and come to this place. This scene undoubtedly caused Lin Dong to be angry. He was the only one who had taken advantage of others from behind. It was unexpected that he had actually been the one opening the path for these 3 fellows this time around. Moreover, looking at the intention of these fellows, it seemed that they were actually intending to snatch away the things that ought to belong to him. A fury surged within Lin Dong's heart. Soon after, he saw another scene that caused him to involuntarily laugh out loud in his extreme anger. That eyes of Mo Shou, who had argued with him earlier, flicked after he saw that the fist imprint and finger imprint had been obtained by Song Mo and Peng Fei. He actually directly extended his hand towards the fist imprint light cluster in front of Lin Dong. "You are seeking death." A cold glint flashed in Lin Dong's eyes. However, just as he was preparing to attack, little Martin's voice suddenly sounded, "Wait." This voice had appeared extremely suddenly, causing Lin Dong to be startled. However, the speed in his hand was also greatly reduced as a result. That Mo Shou took the opportunity to pass by and grab the palm imprint light cluster with a face filled with wild joy. His gaze contained some ridicule as it drifted towards Lin Dong. Song Duan and the 2 others did not plan to remain for long after obtaining the item. This space seemed to be emitting an exclusion strength that pushed them out of it. "Bastard." Lin Dong's expression was gloomy. Immediately, he wanted to give chase and head out to settle the scores. However, little Martin swayed and drifted out. He lazily said, "What are you so anxious about? What have you discovered?" Lin Dong gritted his teeth in the face of this manner of little Martin. However, he immediately calmed down. Although little Martin loved to joke at times, Lit would clearly not do something vexatious at such a time. Since this was not the case, it was likely that this cunning old fellow had discovered something again. How uninteresting. Little Martin, who originally wanted to see Lin Dong jumping on his feet, was startled when it saw this. Clearly, it had not expected Lin Dong to react to the situation so quickly. Immediately, he curled his mouth and spoke. "If you really go and snatch those 3 things, it is likely that you will allow the inheritance of the 8th-level sect to pass by you." Little Martin looked at the stone block. At this moment, the palm imprint, fist imprint and the finger hole had disappeared. However, little Martin's eyes were increasingly focused. "Extend your hand." Lin Dong hesitated for a moment after hearing little Martin's faint voice. He extended his hand and gently touched the stone block. Boom. Lin Dong's expression instantly changed when he made contact with the stone block. A little paleness vaguely appeared on his face. At this moment, he could sense a wave of extremely fierce and majestic fist aura sweeping out from within the interior of the stone block in all directions. That fist aura was the same as the one which was present in the body of the old man in the picture earlier. The fist aura was shapeless and colorless. However, one was able to sense its actual existence. It was as vast and mighty as an ocean, and Lin Dong was just like a small boat that could be overturned anytime within it. Lin Dong appeared extremely tiny in the face of the fist aura. Even Lin Dong's legs felt weak in the face of the majestic steel-like pressure. Crack! The stone block suddenly cracked, forming numerous crack lines. After which, they expanded and the stone block finally completely cracked apart. Following the bursting apart of the stone block, an invisible cluster that seemed to be like the fiercest and most powerful thing in this world in Lin Dong's eyes, slowly surfaced from within the stone block. After which, it was suspended in front of Lin Dong. This is fist aura. Lin Dong's eyes shrunk as he stared at the strange thing in front of it. He could sense the frightening strength contained within it. 8-level fist aura. This is the real 8-level true ideal. Those earlier are merely low-quality objections. If you take them, you would instead be directly expelled from this place, and you can forget about obtaining the 8-level fist aura. Little Martin spoke faintly. Lin Dong inhaled a breath of cold air. From the picture earlier, he was aware that this 8-level fist aura should be left behind by that extremely frightening old man. Lin Dong was unaware of just what level that old man had reached. He was actually able to form such a fist aura. This invisible ethereal thing was not something that someone of Lin Dong level could come into contact with. Lin Dong involuntarily felt an impulse to form some cold perspiration when he thought of how precious the 8-level fist aura was. It was fortunate that he did not obtain that light cluster earlier. Otherwise, he would really lose something precious and obtain something that was far less valuable. No wonder that old man mentioned someone with an affinity. It seemed that those words were true. Those 3 clusters of light earlier were clearly just something to trick people. Lin Dong parted his mouth and quietly calmed his heart. Only then did he extend his hand and grabbed at the 8-level fist aura. The latter did not pose any resistance. It directly and successfully entered Lin Dong's body. After which, Lin Dong could also sense the 8-level fist aura entering his dantian, and quietly suspending within it. It was completely without any fierce overbearingness. However, Lin Dong could sense that as long as he activated it quietly, this 8-level fist aura would unleash an extremely powerful and lethal blow. This thing was just like an enhancement item. In the future, as long as Lin Dong mixed any attack that he used in the future with a little of it, the might of the attack would suddenly soar. This was the true inheritance of the 8-level sect. Child, you still have more to learn. Once you possess Grandpa Martin's eyesight, you will be able to roam this world as you wish. Little Martin laughed. Its laughter contained a pride that could not be hidden. Lin Dong involuntarily parted his mouth and smiled when he heard this. However, he must admit that little Martin's eyesight was sharp. If it was not because little Martin had opened his mouth earlier, it was likely that Lin Dong would have been expelled from this place, and would not be able to obtain this 8-level fist aura. Let's go. It's time to leave. There are still some scores that must be settled. It is not so easy to take advantage of me. Lin Dong smiled while his eyes gradually sunk a little. Although he might not have obtained this 8-level fist aura, if it was not because of the interruption of those fellows, the feeling of having been robbed by others was truly displeasing. Since Lin Dong felt displeased in his heart, he naturally needed to settle the source of his displeasure. A cold glint flickered in Lin Dong's eyes. His body moved and gradually faded. Finally, he completely disappeared from this place. The interior of the main hall was in chaos. Everyone were examining the stone block. The hands of Lin Dong, Song Duan and the two others were pressed tightly onto it. A powerful ripple was being vaguely emitted from the interior of the stone block. Little Flame stood beside Lin Dong. He frowned while looking at Song Duan and the two others, holding back his impulse to send three hateful fellows flying with his metal rod. Before receiving Lin Dong's orders, he would definitely suppress the various emotions within his heart. Whump! A slight sound was suddenly emitted from the stone block, while Little Flame was looking at Lin Dong. After which, he saw that the bodies of Song Duan and the two others shook before staggering backwards. However, their faces did not reveal any fury. Instead, they were filled with a wild joy. The expressions of some people within the main hall changed slightly when they saw the expressions of the three of them. Could it be that Song Duan and the two others had obtained something from the stone block? Song Duan and the two others were unconcerned about the gazes of those around. Their eyes swept over Lin Dong's back. After which, a flicker flashed through them. They waved their hands. Let's go. It appeared that they were aware that their action earlier would definitely anger Lin Dong. Although they were not afraid, they did not wish to fight head-on against someone with a crazy temperament. Moreover, they had already obtained the inheritance. Once they successfully mastered it in the future, it was likely that Lin Dong could no longer be so arrogant in front of them. Hearing the voices of Song Duan and the two others, those subordinates of theirs hurriedly nodded. After which, they pulled back. Aren't the three of you a little too irresponsible if you leave now? However, just when the three of them were preparing to leave, Lin Dong, who had their backs facing them, finally let out a faint smile. His hand that was adhered to the stone block fell, before he turned around and stared at Song Duan's group with a mocking expression. Song Duan and the two others narrowed their eyes when they saw that Lin Dong still managed to give chase. They asked, "What do you want?" If it is not because I had blocked the fist aura on the stone block, it is likely that the three of you would not have been able to enter. It is right that anyone who sees it should have a share. However, the three of you had even snatched my share. Isn't it a little too overboard? Lin Dong smiled. His eyes revealed a thread of chillness as he looked towards Mo Shao and slowly said, "Lin Dong, this kind of inheritance is something that anyone with ability should obtain. The fact that you have failed to snatch it means that you do not possess the ability. What are you planning to do by saying such nonsense here? Do you want us to hand over the inheritance that we have obtained?" Mo Shao could not help but let out a cold mocking laughter. Moreover, the three of us did not make a fuss over you having snatched most of the demon dragon dog's essence blood outside. However, don't think that you really have the qualification to stand on the ground as us. We are not like Shakuan, who had just entered the 2 Yuan Nirvana stage. A glint flashed through the eyes of Song Duan and Peng Fei. However, they did not say anything. These two people were clearly extremely intelligent. Even at this time, they did not speak to Lin Dong with harsh words. Clearly, they were still a little fearful of Lin Dong. At this moment, everyone in the main hall had understood the story from the beginning to the end. It seemed that Lin Dong had entered the stone block first and found some treasure within it. However, before he could obtain them, Song Duan and the two others, who had followed him in, had interfered. Moreover, the subsequent events could also be easily foretold. After having been taken advantage of, Lin Dong would naturally not let the matter rest. Yet, attempting to get Mo Shao's group to hand over something that they had got their hands on was clearly an impossible thing. Looking at this situation, a face-off would likely be unavoidable regardless of how one tried to avoid it. The eyes of quite a number of people flickered when they thought of this. Naturally, the greater the chaos in this situation, the better it would be for them. They might even be able to randomly fish something during the chaos and obtain some surprise. What you have said is true. The inheritance here is indeed something that those with ability should obtain. However, with your ability, it is likely that you have yet to reach this level. Lin Dong smiled. The words that he spoke caused the expression of quite a number of people to change slightly. Oh? Ha ha, Lin Dong, looks like beating Shakuan has really boosted your confidence. Although you have already heard these words several times, I shall still repeat it to you again. A person should be aware of his limits. At times, it is not a bad thing to suffer some losses. Mo Shaw's tone was dense. Looking at his expression, everyone were aware that this expert from the Sand Empire had already held a killing intent towards Lin Dong. Hand over the inheritance that you have obtained. However, Lin Dong merely raised his eyes in the face of Mo Shaw's dense words. He ceased saying anything and extended his hand. Rat, you are seeking death. The few experts behind Mo Shaw immediately became furious when they saw this situation. Mo Shaw's eyes stared intently at Lin Dong. A moment later, his throat emitted a strange creaking sound as he slowly said, Brat, I'm afraid that you don't have the qualification to say these words to me. It's just as well. I also wish to see just how outstanding this fellow, who has a mighty reputation recently, really is. Hopefully, you are not just a useless person who only knows how to speak. Mo Shaw's eyes had completely turned dark and chilly after his cry sounded. He took a stride forward and majestic powerful Yuan power surged out from within his body like a volcano that had erupted. A fierce and mighty pressure swept across the main hall. Other than Song Duan and a few others, the remaining people hurriedly stepped backwards, while maneuvering their Yuan power to block that Yuan power pressure. Swoosh! Mo Shaw's figure directly turned into a black figure and rushed forward. Surging Yuan power gathered and immediately carried a shocking pressure, as it ruthlessly swept towards Lin Dong. Blood surged in Little Flame's eyes, when he saw that Mo Shaw was finally unable to control himself any longer and attacked Lin Dong. However, just as he was about to attack, Lin Dong merely waved his hand and stopped Little Flame. A thought passed through his mind and surging Yuan power, as well as mental energy agglomerated in front of him, forming a defensive barrier. Boom! Mo Shaw's attack violently landed onto the barrier that was formed from mental energy and Yuan power. Immediately, a low muffled sound was emitted. Although the powerful force had shook the barrier until ripples were formed, it failed to shatter it. By relying on the Yuan power of a 1 Yuan Nirvana stage, and the ability of a 1 Seal Heaven Symbol Master, the current Lin Dong would not be at a disadvantage even when facing a 2 Yuan Nirvana stage expert head-on. No wonder you are so arrogant. You actually do have some ability. However, you won't be so fortunate after this. Mo Shaw let out a cold laughter after his attack was blocked. His body moved and mud-yellow color Yuan power whizzed out. It vaguely transformed into yellow sand that spread over the sky, possessing an extremely spectacular aura. Clearly, he did not intend to delay this fight any longer. Yellow sand bone eroding palm. A cold cry suddenly sounded from within the yellow sand. One could see the yellow sand permeating the sky gathered in a lightning-like fashion. After which, it directly transformed into an enormous yellow sand fist. An eroding vapor was present within the wind from the fist as it struck towards Lin Dong's barrier from all directions. The people around him were evidently quite surprised when they saw Mo Shaw's actions. They were naturally aware that this yellow sand bone eroding palm was basically one of Mo Shaw's killing move. It was unexpected that he had used it so soon. It seemed that this Lin Dong's was indeed quite skilled. Song Duan and Peng Fei narrowed their eyes when they saw this scene. Their strength was similar to Mo Shaw. This attack from the latter was something that even they did not dare to slight. Lin Dong raised his eyes. His pupils watched the enormous palm, with surging yellow sand that was flying over. He could also sense the sharpness and faint killing intent that was contained within Mo Xiao's attack. Huff! A cluster of white vapor was spat out from Lin Dong's mouth. Immediately, he threw a fist forward in front of all the eyes present within the main hall. This was a simple fist, without any signs of martial arts being used. There was also the absence of any shocking strength surging within it. This fist appeared completely ordinary, without any area that caused one to be surprised. However, none of them knew that when Lin Dong executed this punch, the 8th-level fist aura within his dantian wiggled slightly. Immediately, a fist aura was separated under the command of his mind. Bang! When this fist aura surged, a finishing touch seemed to have been placed on that ordinary punch from Lin Dong. In an instant, it underwent a complete transformation. An invisible fierce powerful ripple swept over the place at a frightening speed. The expressions of Song Duan and Peng Fei immediately underwent an intense transformation. At this moment, they could vaguely sense that Lin Dong's body seemed to be showing signs that it had synchronized with the ancient stone block. They were unaware of just what this scene represented. However, they could sense that Lin Dong originally ordinary punch currently possessed an extremely frightening explosive force. Bang! The fist wind that contained the 8th-level fist aura collided with that yellow sand palm without giving way. Break! An incomparably fierce tone was suddenly spat out from Lin Dong's mouth. At the next instant, everyone's eyes widened. They could see that Mo Xiao's full-powered palm had actually collapsed at this moment. Swoosh! The expression of Mo Xiao, who was at the back, suddenly turned pale white at this moment. A dense shock surged within his eyes as he looked at Lin Dong. The interior of the main hall was completely silent. Everyone's eyes contained a shocked expression that could not be concealed. They were truly unable to believe that the palm, which contained nearly the full strength of Mo Xiao, would actually be forcefully shattered by Lin Dong's simple and ordinary punch. What a frightening fist aura! Of course, those experts like Song Duan possessed an extreme solemnness within their eyes. They were naturally able to sense the shocking fist aura that was being emitted from this single punch of Lin Dong. The intensity was as if it intended to shatter this entire place. They were really unable to imagine just how was it possible for Lin Dong to possess such a frightening fist aura. All of them clearly understood that an extremely rare yet powerful thing like a fist aura was not something that someone at their level could come into contact with. Only those true experts could brew such a frightening conception. At that level, it was likely that most martial arts were already useless towards them. By possessing that kind of aura, a simple raising of their limbs would be powerful enough to shatter the lands and the sky. How is that possible? Song Duan and Peng Fei looked at each other. They were able to see some disbelief within the other party's eyes. However, both of them were also extremely intelligent. After the initial shock, an expression of deep thought flashed across their eyes. A moment later, their bodies shook, seemingly having understood something. The true inheritance of this 8th-level sect is not the martial arts, but the 8th-level fist aura. Song Duan and Peng Fei's expression turned bitter at that instant. A regret surged up their hearts. Although the martial arts that they had obtained was quite good, it was undoubtedly an entire level weaker when compared to this 8th-level fist aura. The hearts of two of them, which were still extremely happy at having obtained an inheritance earlier, was drenched with a basin of cold water. Their entire body turned icy cold as a result. Mo Xiao's expression was a little pale, as he hurriedly took a couple of steps back in front of numerous stunned eyes. His gaze carried a little shock as he spoke in a hoarse voice. This is the 8th-level fist aura. You have actually obtained the 8th-level fist aura. Mo Xiao involuntarily roared the last few words. There was a dense greed and dissatisfaction that surged within his eyes. Originally, he had been gloating because he thought that Lin Dong had gained nothing. However, This scene had caused him to understand that the one had the final laugh in this 8-level sect remains was still Lin Dong. Thanks to you. Lin Dong smiled slightly. There was nothing fake in his smile. This caused Mo Shao to involuntarily spit a mouthful of blood when he heard this. Although he did not understand what Lin Dong meant, it seemed that the reason Lin Dong was able to obtain the 8-level fist aura was possibly due to him. Could it be? Mo Shao's thoughts was quite acute. His mind spun and he seemed to have understood something. His eyes suddenly shrunk. Those 3 light clusters are merely lures. The true 8-level fist aura still remained on the stone block. You are correct. Too bad there is no prize. Lin Dong parted his mouth and smiled. His eyes suddenly turned cold as he strided forward and ruthlessly threw another punch. The 8-level fist aura also surged out from his dantian once again. The aura around Lin Dong had also become as fierce and violent as the lightning that lingered in the clouds. Bang! The space in the large hall shook violently for a moment. That wind from the punch that contained a thunder-like fierceness swept towards Mo Shao in a lightning-like manner, appearing like a storm. Bastard, why are you attacking us since you have obtained the 8-level fist aura? Don't tell me that we are not even allowed to drink some soup even though you are feasting on some meat. Who do you think you are? Mo Shao roared angrily. The yuan power within his body seemed to have been suppressed, as he sensed that shocking fist aura pressure. I do not mind letting you guys have soup. However, I do not like to be schemed by others, nor do I like your attitude. Lin Dong's eyes were icy cold. His arm shook and the majestic fist wind charged at Mo Shao, who had maneuvered his yuan power to surround himself with lightning-like speed. Boom! The fist wind smashed onto the fully armed Mo Shao's body. A low muffled sound spread, and a shocking energy ripple swept over from the mid-air. After which, everyone saw that the layers of defense over Mo Shao's body actually crumbed directly. Grug! A mouthful of fresh blood was spat out as Mo Shao's body miserably shot backwards. Finally, he violently slammed onto a wall. That hard wall swiftly formed a couple of crack lines. Every single expert from the Sand Empire changed their expressions due to shock when they saw this scene. They had heard rumors that Lin Dong had defeated Shakuan. However, they had only heard of it. Moreover, Mo Shao's strength was stronger than Shakuan. Yet, after only a couple of exchanges, Mo Shao was actually miserably defeated by Lin Dong. Swoosh! Lin Dong's body rushed out. With a flash, he appeared in front of Mo Shao. He curled his hand and grabbed at the latter's head. A devouring strength erupted. After which, everyone saw a light cluster being directly ripped from Mo Shao's head. Little flame. Lin Dong let out a low cry after ripping out this light cluster. His arm tossed and the light cluster was thrown towards Little Flame. The latter was startled momentarily before grabbing it and placing it into his body. The inheritance that Mo Shao had obtained was actually being snatched. This caused Mo Shao's eyes to turn blood red. He immediately turned his head and Song Duan's group before speaking in a dense voice. Do the both of you really think this fellow will let up if you stand idly by the side now? Mo Shao clearly understood that his strength alone was no match for Lin Dong, who had obtained the 8-level fist aura. If he wanted to fight with Lin Dong, he must join hands with Song Duan and Peng Fei. The expression in the eyes of Song Duan and Peng Fei changed a little when they heard Mo Shao's words. They clenched their fists slightly. A moment later, they suddenly relaxed it. After which, they raised their heads, smiled towards Lin Dong and said, "If brother Lin Dong really wants it, we will hand over the martial arts inheritance." The atmosphere within the large hall became a little quiet. Everyone, even Lin Dong, were a little stunned as they looked at Song Duan and Peng Fei. Clearly, They did not expect that these two yuan nirvana stage experts would actually choose to surrender. You too. Mo Sha was also stunned when he saw this scene. His throat involuntarily fell to sweetness again. He did not expect Song Duan and Peng Fei were actually this cunning. Lin Dong stared at Song Duan and Peng Fei. He immediately laughed softly. It was likely that he understood the intention of these two. Song Duan and Peng Fei were extremely unwilling to hand over the inheritance martial arts. However, they were also aware of how trouble it would be to deal with Lin Dong, who had obtained the 8th-level fist aura. Therefore, they directly lowered their stance and surrender in front of so many people. The both of them had given Lin Dong a great amount of face. This cunningness was indeed quite great. Most importantly, this character of being able to bend depending on the situation caused Lin Dong to be a little surprised. Anyone with affinity can obtain this inheritance treasure. Since the both of you have this affinity, it is only natural that I do not have the qualification to say any more nonsense. Lin Dong nodded slightly and laughed. He did not act too ruthlessly. Lin Dong's words were similar to those with ability should possess it that Mo Sha had said earlier. The meaning within it, however, was completely different. This caused Mo Sha's expression to be incomparable green with fury. This fellow was just using him to set an example. On the other hand, a joy flashed past the face of Song Duan and Peng Fei. They cupped their hands together towards Lin Dong. It seemed that this soft stance did indeed possess some benefit. At the very least, it was many times better than Mo Sha, who had lost both his face and treasure. Lin Dong, you should not be too pleased. My Sand Empire will definitely not let this matter rest. Green and white mixed on Mo Sha's face, causing him to appear extremely miserable. He looked at the mocking gaze from around him, before finally rubbing off the trace of blood on the corner of his mouth. After tossing some vicious words, he led his people and left with great dissatisfaction. Lin Dong glanced at Mo Sha's back. He did not stop him. Lin Dong might be able to defeat the 2 yuan nirvana stage expert Mo Sha, but if the latter really wanted to flee, even Lin Dong would have to use some of his trump cards as payment if he wanted to kill him. At this moment, however, Lin Dong was unwilling to use these trump cards on Mo Sha. Numerous eyes watched this scene from within the main hall. All of them involuntarily, but quietly clicked their tongue. Some gazes repeatedly swept over Lin Dong. They were really unable to imagine that Lin Dong was actually able to use his strength alone to force 3 great high-rank empire to surrender and admit defeat. Let's go. It is likely that the 4 mysterious halls are about to be opened. Those are the main course. Lin Dong was unconcerned about the surrounding eyes. He turned his head and whispered to Little Flame with a smile. After which, he ceased remaining in this place. His body moved and he turned around to leave in front of the complicated gazes of Song Duan and the others. Part 1 end here.